Tonight, I want to take you back to a crisp autumn in New England. I want to tell you a story about how a single, unexpected moment can rewrite the entire code of a person's life. When I was 17 years old, my universe was incredibly small, and I liked it that way. I was a genuine, unapologetic nerd living in a quiet Massachusetts suburb. While other kids my age were sneaking out to parties or going to Friday night football games, my world existed within the glowing perimeter of a computer monitor. It was the era when the iPhone 4 had just been released, feeling like a miraculous slab of glass and metal. I spent my evenings teaching myself how to code, trying to piece together simple, clunky applications. My proudest achievement was a custom modification I had built for the game Counter-Strike 1.6. I would sit in my room for hours, listening to the steady, comforting hum of my PC's cooling fans, typing lines of code, testing them, and sharing the modified game files with my friends. Hearing them log on and praise the custom weapons I had designed gave me a sense of purpose. I was a creator in a digital space. I didn't care about anything outside of it. Then came a perfectly ordinary Sunday. I was hanging out with my best friend, tagging along with his family to run some errands. We stopped at a gas station convenience store, and his dad, feeling generous, bought a few Powerball tickets. He handed one to me with a casual smile. "Here you go, kid. For luck." I thanked him, folded the small slip of paper, and shoved it into the pocket of my jeans. When I got home, I tossed it onto my desk. It landed somewhere between a tangled mess of USB cables and a stack of blank CDs, completely forgotten by the time I booted up my computer. Life continued its quiet rhythm. I went to high school, came home, and lost myself in game servers and programming forums. About a month later, I was cleaning off my desk, looking for a misplaced flash drive, when I found that crumpled lottery ticket. Out of pure, idle curiosity, I opened a browser tab and pulled up the winning numbers from the previous month. I looked at the screen. I looked at the ticket in my hand. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. I had matched enough numbers to win the third-tier prize. $50,000. For a 17-year-old kid whose biggest financial asset was a jar of loose change, the number was incomprehensible. But there was a catch. Because I was a minor, I couldn't legally claim the prize. I walked into the living room and handed the ticket to my dad. He was a factory worker, a man who spent his life on his feet, working long hours just to keep the lights on. When he realized what he was holding, his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. He was genuinely thrilled for me. He took the day off to drive to the lottery headquarters and claim the prize on my behalf. Massachusetts took its heavy 6.25% state tax, and after the federal deductions, exactly $35,500 landed in a savings account. That evening, my dad sat down across from me at the kitchen table. He asked me what I wanted to do with the money. Honestly, my mind immediately went to electronics. I thought about building the ultimate, top-of-the-line gaming PC. I thought about pre-ordering the rumored iPhone 5, maybe getting a new PSP. My dad listened, then shook his head with a gentle smile. "Why don't we get you a car?" he suggested. "You need to get around." "Tell you what. You get your learner's permit, find a part-time job to cover your gas, your insurance, and your maintenance, and you can pick out a car. I'll buy it for you with this money." That night, I sat in my bedroom with my older brother. I knew absolutely nothing about cars. To me, they were just metal boxes that took you from point A to point B. My brother pulled up a chair and opened YouTube. He started showing me what fell into our price range. He pointed out the Scion FRS, the Subaru BRZ, the Nissan 370Z. As we clicked from video to video, something strange happened. I started paying attention to the shape of the headlights. I learned what a rim was. I found myself reading about horsepower and torque. The algorithms caught on to my searches, and a few days later, a video autoplayed on my screen. It was a showcase of a newly announced Honda Civic Type R. I stared at the screen, captivated. I loved the aggressive, sharp lines. I loved the bold red badge on the grille. It looked completely different from the boring sedans parked in my neighborhood. Just like that, a switch flipped in my brain. The coding software on my computer remained closed. The iPhone rumors didn't matter anymore. My entire digital world was suddenly replaced by exhaust sounds, car reviews, and virtual tours of car interiors. My best friend and I started spending our weekends going to local car meets, walking around vast parking lots, admiring the polished paint jobs and customized engines. The passion was sudden, total, and all-consuming. I threw myself into studying for the learner's permit and passed the written exam easily. To get ready for the road test, I asked my uncle to teach me how to drive. We spent hours in his old, beat-up sedan. He was a strict teacher, quick to yell if I braked too hard or took a turn too fast. But I didn't mind. In the quiet moments, cruising down empty suburban backroads, he would share pieces of life advice. He talked about responsibility, about staying focused. I had spent so much of my life isolated in my room that these drives with him felt like an awakening. The day of my driving test finally arrived. In Massachusetts, you have to bring a sponsor to the RMV, so my uncle sat in the back seat while the stern examiner sat next to me with a clipboard. My heart was pounding against my ribs. I drove carefully, checking my mirrors, using my signals, doing everything exactly by the book. The drive felt smooth. When we pulled back into the RMV parking lot, I put the car in park, waiting for the congratulatory handshake. Instead, the examiner marked an X on his paper. He told me I had failed. At a quiet intersection a mile back, I had done a rolling stop. I hadn't let the car come to a complete, dead halt at the stop sign. I was devastated. All I could think about was that Honda slipping through my fingers. But my uncle just patted my shoulder as we walked out. "Don't quit over a piece of paper," he said quietly. "It's just a test. You'll get it next time." I didn't give up. The obsession was too strong. A few weeks later, my friend's parents offered to drive me to a local Honda dealership just to look around. And there it was, sitting on the showroom floor under the bright fluorescent lights. A stunning, pitch-black Civic. I walked up to it, running my hand lightly over the cold, polished metal of the door. A salesman walked over, noticing the absolute awe on my face. I was honest with him. I told him this was the exact car I wanted, the one I had been dreaming about every single night. I asked him for the price. He pulled out a sheet of paper. He explained the dealer markup, the optional packages, the taxes, and the document fees. The out-the-door price was $45,000. The number hit me like cold water. It was a massive shock. My prize money wouldn't cover it. I couldn't finance the rest because I was 17 with zero credit history. My dad couldn't co-sign a loan like that on a factory worker's salary. It was mathematically impossible. I looked down at the shiny tile floor, embarrassed, and told him it was too high. The salesman, seeing my disappointment, gently guided me to another part of the lot. He pointed to a Honda Civic Sport hatchback. It had a similar aggressive shape, a sleek design, and plenty of power, but it came without the massive type or markup. It wasn't the exact car from my videos, but it was close enough. It was beautiful. I had a new goal. I went back to the RMV for my second attempt at the road test. This time, I stopped at every line perfectly. When the examiner handed me the stamped paper with his signature of approval, a wave of pure, unfiltered joy washed over me. I finally held the key to my freedom. True to the deal I made with my dad, I immediately went out and found a job. I was hired for an entry-level position at the local UPS facility. My nights were spent in a massive, echoing warehouse, sorting packages, packing boxes, and loading trucks. It was exhausting, physical work that made my back ache and my hands callous. But I didn't care about the heavy lifting. Every time I taped a box shut, every time I clocked out at midnight, my mind was perfectly clear. I was earning my gas money. I was earning my insurance. I was moving, step by step, toward that black hatchback waiting for me in the future. The rhythm of the UPS warehouse became the new soundtrack of my life. It was a symphony of roaring diesel engines, the heavy, endless hum of conveyor belts, and the sharp tear of packing tape. I worked the night shift, sorting packages in a massive, drafty building where the cold New England air seeped through the concrete walls. It was brutal, physical work. My hands grew calloused, and my back ached constantly, but I didn't care. Every heavy box I lifted felt like a gallon of premium gas. Every midnight shift I finished felt like an insurance premium paid. I was holding up my end of the bargain, completely fueled by the image of that black Honda Civic Sport hatchback waiting for me. I had the printouts of the insurance quotes folded neatly in my bedroom drawer. I had the math figured out. I just needed my dad to make the move. I waited for what felt like the right moment. It was a Tuesday evening, just before I had to leave to catch the bus for my shift. I found him in the living room, sitting low in his worn fabric recliner. The room was dark, lit only by the flickering blue glow of the television. He was watching the local news, looking exhausted from his own long hours at the factory. I stood by the doorway, shifting my weight from foot to foot, and gently brought up the car. I told him I had my savings ready for the running costs. I told him the dealer still had the exact model we talked about. He didn't turn his head to look at me. I watched his jaw tighten. He reached out, muted the television, and let out a long, heavy sigh. "Listen," he said, his voice low and uncomfortably quiet. "Your aunt, she ran into some real financial trouble this month. She needed a loan just to keep her head above water. I had to help her out. I transferred a chunk of that money to her. He finally looked over at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. Just give it a few weeks, okay? She promised to pay it back by the end of the month. When she does, we'll go straight to the dealership and look at that car. I stood there in the dim light, swallowing the sudden, sharp lump in my throat. I was deeply disappointed, but I didn't let it show. I nodded. We were a working-class family. We didn't have safety nets. When family needed help, you helped them. It was the unspoken rule of our household. It's okay, Dad, I said quietly. I understand. I can wait. I zipped up my jacket, walked out into the cold, and took the bus to the warehouse. I picked up extra shifts. I worked harder. I waited. A month drifted by, slow and agonizing. The crisp autumn air turned brutal. The Massachusetts winter arrived, bringing freezing rain and biting winds that cut right through my thin work jacket while I stood at the bus stop at 1 in the morning. Every shivering ride home was a reminder that I was supposed to be driving my own car by now, heater blasting, listening to my own music. One Sunday morning, I walked into the kitchen. The house was quiet, save for the low hum of the refrigerator. My dad was standing by the counter, holding a mug of black coffee, staring blankly out the window at the frost covering the front lawn. He looked older that morning, his shoulders slumped as if carrying a physical weight. I didn't even have to ask. He heard my footsteps, turned around, and I could see the answer written in the deep lines on his face. He didn't try to soften the blow this time. He just looked tired. She hasn't paid me back, he said flatly, staring down at his coffee. And the property taxes hit us hard this week. The heating bill is up. The math just isn't working right now. I can't tie up what's left of that cash in a brand new car. He paused, refusing to meet my eyes. I'll start looking on Craigslist. I'll find you an old beater, maybe something for 2 or 3 grand. Just something with 4 wheels to get you back and forth to work so you don't freeze at the bus stop. I felt a cold, heavy stone drop straight to the bottom of my stomach. The beautiful, sleek black Civic vanished from my mind, instantly replaced by the grim reality of a rusted, unreliable junker that would probably break down on the side of the highway in the snow. I looked at my dad. I saw a man who had worked his hands to the bone his entire life, drowning in bills, trying to keep the house warm. I felt a profound, suffocating sadness, but I couldn't bring myself to add to his burden. I couldn't be the selfish teenager demanding a shiny new toy while he worried about keeping the lights on. I forced my expression to soften. I built a wall over the crushing disappointment in my chest. Don't worry about the beater, Dad, I told him, my voice remarkably steady. I really don't need it. I've got a good routine going. I can catch rides with the guys from the warehouse, or just keep taking the bus. It's really not a big deal. You keep the money. Focus on the house bills. He looked up at me, a flash of relief washing over his tired face. He nodded, muttering a quiet thank you. I turned around and walked back down the narrow hallway to my bedroom. I closed the door softly behind me, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the blank wall. The silence in the room was deafening. I had played the part of the good, understanding son perfectly. But inside, in the quiet dark of my own mind, my dream had just quietly, painfully died. The human mind has a strange way of trying to protect itself. When you are deeply hurt by the people you love, your brain tries to bury it. You tell yourself it's fine. You tell yourself they had a good reason. I tried to believe that. The very next evening, I was lying on my mattress, my body aching from another brutal night at the warehouse. The room was dark, the only light coming from the harsh glow of my phone screen. I was mindlessly scrolling through Instagram, letting my tired brain go numb. I swiped past memes, news updates, and pictures of people living lives that felt a million miles away from my own. Then, a video autoplayed on my feed. It was a highly stylized, edited video with a heavy, pulsing bass track. The camera panned slowly across the hood of a gleaming, brand-new sports car, resting in a familiar driveway. It was a Subaru BRZ. The exact same car my older brother had pointed out to me on YouTube all those months ago. The account that posted it belonged to him. I sat up slowly. The cold air in my bedroom suddenly felt suffocating. My brother didn't have a job. He hadn't had one in over 6 months. He spent his days sleeping until noon and his nights shouting into a gaming headset. A sickening, twisting realization began to crawl its way up my throat. I didn't think. I just stood up, walked out of my room, and marched down the short hallway. I pushed his bedroom door open. He was sitting right there in his expensive gaming chair, headset resting around his neck, looking incredibly pleased with himself as he tapped away at his keyboard. I held up my phone, the video still looping on the screen. My hand was physically shaking. I asked him, my voice tight and quiet, how he managed to get it. He didn't look guilty. He didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just leaned back, a lazy, arrogant smirk spreading across his face, annoyed that I had interrupted his game. "You act like your little money was some massive fortune," he scoffed, his voice dripping with casual entitlement. "Don't be so selfish. I actually need a good-looking car to get to job interviews. And yeah, Dad bought it for me." The floor seemed to drop out from underneath me. All the air left the room. It wasn't about the car anymore. It was about the lie. The elaborate, calculated lie. My dad hadn't loaned a dime to my aunt. He hadn't used the money to save the house from property taxes or pay the heating bill. He had taken the money from the ticket I won, the money he looked me in the eye and promised to me, and he used it to buy my unemployed older brother a brand new sports car. He did all of that while watching me stand in the freezing rain to catch a public bus to a warehouse every night. My entire world collapsed in that single moment. I didn't yell. I didn't scream or throw anything. I just turned around, walked back to my room, and quietly closed the door. For the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly hollow. The people who were supposed to protect me had looked right through me. But anger is a strange, powerful thing. If you let a betrayal like that sit long enough, it stops burning and turns to ice. It crystallizes into a sharp, unbreakable focus. I realized that if I stayed in that house, the resentment would slowly eat me alive. So, I packed my clothes into a couple of duffel bags. I reached out to a guy I worked with at the warehouse who had a spare room in his apartment, and I moved out the very next day. I stopped talking to my father. I cut my brother off completely. I just put my head down, locked away the hurt, and let the cold anger fuel me. Every time I felt exhausted, every time my muscles screamed to quit, I pictured that Subaru BRZ sitting in their driveway. I stayed at UPS. I worked the warehouse floor until I knew every route, every zip code, every logistic system by heart. And the very moment I was old enough and eligible, I bid for a driving position. I got it. I put on the brown uniform. I took the wheel of the delivery truck. The hours were grueling, and the New England winters were unforgiving on the roads, but the paychecks were heavy. I was finally making real, undeniable money. Money with strong union benefits. Money that no one could ever lie to me about or take away from me. A few years passed. The bitter anger that had driven me out of my childhood home slowly faded, replaced by a quiet, unshakable confidence. I had built a life from the ground up, entirely on my own terms. One Saturday morning, with the autumn air crisp and bright, I didn't take the bus. I didn't ask a coworker for a ride. I called a cab to take me to a premium dealership across the state line. I walked onto the lot, completely ignoring the rows of practical sedans and the hatchbacks I used to dream about. I walked straight into the main showroom. I didn't buy a Honda Civic. I bought a Chevrolet Corvette C7. It was a masterpiece of American engineering. Sharp, wide, and aggressive, looking less like a car and more like a fighter jet. I paid the heavy down payment with my own hard-earned savings. I financed the rest with the immaculate credit score I had meticulously built myself. When the salesman handed me the keys, I walked out into the sunlight and sat down in the low, leather driver's seat. I gripped the steering wheel and pressed the ignition button. The massive V8 engine roared to life. It was a deep, guttural thunder that reverberated right through my chest, vibrating up my arms. I wasn't that naive, hopeful 17-year-old kid anymore. I drove the Corvette off the lot, the raw power of the engine pushing me down the open highway. And as I shifted into a higher gear, listening to the beautiful, violent sound of the exhaust echoing off the passing trees, I realized something incredibly peaceful. The anger toward my family was completely gone. I didn't hate them anymore. I just simply didn't need them. Time has a strange way of filtering out the noise. Once you realize you are entirely self-sufficient, the heavy, suffocating resentment you hold against the people who let you down simply evaporates. You don't wake up angry anymore. You just wake up and live your life. It had been years since I drove down the narrow, familiar streets of my old neighborhood. The deep, rumbling idle of the Corvette's massive V8 engine seemed entirely out of place here, bouncing off the vinyl siding of the quiet suburban houses. I pulled into the cracked concrete driveway of my childhood home and shifted into park. Walking through the front door felt different. I wasn't the bitter 17-year-old taking the bus in the freezing rain anymore. I was a grown man, standing on my own 2 feet. The reaction from my parents was a mix of quiet shock and an unspoken, awkward respect. They saw the car parked outside. They knew what it meant. But I hadn't come back to gloat or demand apologies. I was just there to visit. As I walked down the short hallway to use the bathroom, I passed the smallest bedroom in the house. The door was cracked open. The blinds were pulled tightly shut, completely blocking out the bright afternoon sun. Sitting in the dark, illuminated only by the harsh, pale glow of a dual-monitor setup, was my youngest brother. He was 18 now. He had his heavy gaming headset clamped over his ears, his fingers flying across a mechanical keyboard, shouting callouts into his microphone. Empty soda cans and snack wrappers cluttered his desk. He had graduated high school, but he had no job, dropped out, and absolutely no direction. I stood in the doorway and watched him for a long moment. It was like looking into a mirror of my own past. I saw a kid trapped in a digital loop, letting his actual life slip by while he chased virtual victories. I pushed the door open, reached over, and tapped him on the shoulder. He jumped, pulling one side of his headset off, looking annoyed. "Get your shoes on," I told him. "We're going for a ride." He complained, but he followed me out to the driveway. When he saw the dark, aggressive lines of the Corvette sitting in the sun, his eyes went wide. I tossed him the passenger key fob and told him to get in. I took him out to the interstate, waited for a long, empty stretch of blacktop, and buried the throttle. The acceleration was violent and immediate. The G-force pinned him deep into the leather seat as the exhaust roared, echoing off the concrete barriers. I glanced over and saw a reluctant, adrenaline-fueled grin break across his face. He thought it was incredible. But I could also tell that the Corvette was too much. To an 18-year-old kid with no money, a C7 feels like a spaceship. It's awesome to look at, but it's completely unattainable. It didn't spark a fire, it just provided a quick thrill. I wanted to get him out of that dark bedroom again, so a few weekends later, I dragged him out of bed early on a Sunday morning. I told him we were going to get coffee and look at some metal. I drove us to a massive cars and coffee meet in a neighboring town. The sprawling parking lot was packed. The air smelled strongly of high-octane exhaust, hot rubber, and roasted coffee. Hundreds of car enthusiasts were walking around, popping hoods, and talking about turbochargers and suspension tuning. My brother was walking beside me, hands shoved in his pockets, quietly taking it all in. We walked past lines of classic muscle cars and expensive exotics. He was interested, but quiet. Then, halfway down an aisle of European imports, he stopped completely dead in his tracks. "Wait," he said, pulling his hands out of his pockets and pointing. "What is that?" Sitting low to the ground was a 2010 BMW E9335i sedan. It was painted a deep, metallic blue-black. It didn't have massive spoilers or loud graphics. It was understated, incredibly clean, with a wide, aggressive stance and sleek, classic lines. I had never seen my youngest brother look at anything in the physical world the way he was looking at that car right then. He was completely mesmerized. I walked up to the owner, a guy in his 20s holding a cup of coffee, and struck up a friendly conversation. I mentioned that my kid brother was absolutely fascinated by his build and asked if he wouldn't mind letting him sit in the driver's seat for a minute. The guy smiled, unlocked the car, and pulled the heavy door open. My brother approached it like it was made of glass. He slid into the leather bucket seat. He gripped the thick steering wheel. He ran his hand lightly over the center console and looked out over the hood. In that exact moment, watching the reflection of the dashboard lights in his eyes, I saw it. I saw the spark. It was the exact same, consuming fire I had felt standing in the Honda dealership all those years ago. We stayed at the meet for another hour, but his mind was entirely consumed by the BMW. The drive back to our hometown was quiet. The cabin of the Corvette was insulated from the road noise, leaving only the low thrum of the engine. My brother was staring out the passenger window, entirely lost in thought. "You really liked that BMW, didn't you?" I asked quietly, keeping my eyes on the highway. He turned to look at me, his expression completely serious. "I love it. I can't stop thinking about it. I didn't know a car could look like that. I wish I could actually own something like it." I let the silence hang for a few seconds. I gripped the leather steering wheel, making a decision. "Do you want one?" I asked him. "Because I can help you get it." Before I had even finished the sentence, he sat up straight. "Yes. I want it." "Hold on," I said, my voice turning firm and authoritative. "Listen to me very carefully. I am not buying it for you. I will help you, but only if you make a promise to me right now, and you actually keep it. You put the video games away. You get out of that dark room. You enroll in the community college and take your classes seriously. And you go out and find a part-time job to pay for your own gas, your own insurance, and half the cost of the car. If you do all of that, I will cover the other 50%. And you treat the car with absolute respect. Is that a deal?" He looked me dead in the eye. There was no hesitation. No negotiating. "Deal," he said. I honestly expected him to drag his feet. I thought the initial rush of adrenaline from the car meet would wear off, and he would slip right back into his dark room and his digital world. But less than a week later, my phone buzzed with a picture message. It was a screenshot of a work schedule. He had gone out and applied for a part-time job as a package handler at the exact same UPS facility where I had started. A few days after that, he sent me a picture of his enrollment confirmation from the local community college. He had registered for the fall semester, majoring in accounting. He was keeping his word. The gaming headset began to gather dust on his desk. Now, it was my turn to keep mine. I didn't want him to ever experience the crushing, hollow disappointment I had lived through when I was his age. I didn't want to be another empty promise. So, I sat down at my kitchen table, pulled out my checkbook, and carefully wrote out a check for exactly $6,000. It was a massive chunk of my savings. It was money I had bled for, lifting heavy cardboard boxes in the freezing cold on the warehouse floor. But looking at that small piece of paper, I didn't feel a single ounce of regret. I knew I wasn't just buying metal and rubber, I was buying a lifeline for my brother. Seeing his sudden, drastic turnaround even moved my parents. They didn't have much, but they managed to scrape together an additional $2,000 to help him out. Between his own small savings, my check, and their contribution, the budget was ready. I spent hours scouring the internet, filtering through shady private sellers and overpriced lots, until I finally found it. Located at a reputable, long-standing dealership about 50 miles away in deep New England, there was a 2011 BMW 335 IE90. It was painted a beautiful, deep metallic blue-black. It had a remarkably clean Carfax report and just under 90,000 miles on the odometer. They were asking $11,000. I picked him up early on a Saturday morning. The autumn air was crisp and biting. As we cruised up the highway in the Corvette, I looked over at him in the passenger seat. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "Nervous?" He took a deep breath, his leg bouncing with anxious energy. "I'm just really happy," he said, his voice quiet but intense. "I can't believe this is actually happening. I never thought I would get to own a car like this." He spent the rest of the 50-mile drive talking endlessly about the car. He had done his homework, reciting engine specifications, horsepower figures, and community forums he had been reading. The passion had completely taken root. When we finally pulled into the dealership, the BMW was parked right out front. It looked flawless. The dark paint gleamed under the gray, overcast New England sky. The dealer came out, smiled, and handed us the key fob. My brother was practically floating. He opened the heavy driver's side door, staring blankly at the pristine leather interior, completely blinded by the excitement of the moment. If it were up to him, he would have signed the paperwork right there on the hood without asking a single question. But I was ice cold. I stepped in between him and the car. I popped the hood and took out a flashlight, specifically checking the valve cover and the oil filter housing for the notorious leaks those German engines are famous for. Everything was bone dry. Next, I reached under the steering column and plugged in my personal OBD2 scanner. I ran a deep, thorough diagnostic to search for any hidden engine codes or recently cleared check engine lights. The system came back perfectly clean. Then, we took it for a test drive. I got behind the wheel first. I took it onto a quiet, winding back road. I buried the gas pedal into the floor to test the turbochargers, feeling the smooth, linear pull of the engine. I slammed on the brakes to check for any warping in the rotors, and I listened closely to the suspension over rough patches of pavement. There was no shaking, no hesitation, no rattling. The car was incredibly solid. We went back inside and sat down at a small metal desk in a cramped office that smelled faintly of stale coffee. For a solid hour, I went back and forth with the sales manager. I used every negotiating tactic I had learned over the years. I pointed out minor cosmetic flaws and leveraged the fact that we had a massive cash down payment ready to go. Finally, the manager sighed, rubbed his temples, crossed out a number on his printed sheet, and wrote down a new one. $10,450. That was the out-the-door price. It included the dealership's documentation fees and the strict 6.25% Massachusetts state tax. Because we were putting $8,000 down, my brother only needed to finance a tiny fraction of the cost, which would perfectly build his new credit history without burying him in debt. The paperwork was signed. The car was officially his. But there was a logistical problem. In Massachusetts, you cannot legally drive a newly purchased car off the lot without the RMV issuing the official license plates and registration first. The dealership told us we would have to leave the car there and come back in a few days once the plates arrived. My brother stood in the parking lot, looking at his beautiful new car, the disappointment of having to leave it behind written all over his face. He had worked so hard, and he just wanted it sitting in his driveway. I looked at him. I looked at the dealership staff, who had conveniently gone back inside. And I made a wonderfully stupid, incredibly illegal decision. I walked over to the trunk of my Corvette, popped it open, and pulled out an old, expired set of license plates I had kept from a previous car. I walked over to the BMW and quickly screwed them directly onto the back bumper. I tossed the keys to the Corvette to my younger brother. He caught them, his eyes wide with shock. "Follow me closely," I told him. "And don't get pulled over." I climbed into the driver's seat of his new BMW, started the engine, and drove the 50 miles back to our hometown, constantly checking my rearview mirror to make sure he was right behind me. I did it just so he could wake up the next morning, look out his bedroom window, and see his dream sitting right there in the driveway. From that day forward, everything changed. He completely transformed. He kept his job at UPS, working hard and saving his money. He went to his accounting classes and actually maintained good grades. I never saw him sitting in the dark with a gaming headset ever again. Instead, his weekends were spent carefully washing and waxing the dark blue paint, learning how to change his own oil, and hanging out with a new, real group of friends he met at local car meets. I had kept my promise. I had reached into the mud and pulled him out before he sank into the exact same rut I had almost been trapped in. The years have a way of slipping by quietly once your life finally finds its rhythm. Today, my youngest brother is a completely different person. He is just a few months away from graduating with his accounting degree. He still works his shifts at the UPS facility, earning every dollar he spends. He spends his weekends hanging out with the friends he made at those local car meets, arguing over exhaust setups and tire brands. His dark blue BMW E90 still sits in the driveway, perfectly maintained, polished, and treated with the absolute respect he promised me. I never see him sitting in the dark anymore. He lives in the real world now. As for me, my life has remained steady. I still put on my brown uniform, I still drive my delivery routes, and I still have my Corvette. When I look at my brother, I feel a deep, settling peace in my chest. I know that I reached into the mud and pulled him out. I broke the cycle. I made sure that he didn't have to carry the same heavy, hollow feeling of betrayal that I was forced to carry. But human nature is a complicated thing. Even when you are happy, even when you know you did the right thing, the mind still likes to wander. Sometimes, on nights exactly like tonight, when the house is completely silent, the lights are off, and the cold rain taps gently against the bedroom window, I find myself staring up at the ceiling. My thoughts drift back in time. Past the delivery trucks, past the Corvette, past the cold warehouse floor. I think all the way back to that cramped, quiet bedroom when I was 17 years old. I remember the comforting hum of my old computer tower. I remember the glowing lines of code on the monitor, the digital worlds I was building, and the pure, unfiltered joy of creating something out of absolutely nothing. I had a gift for it. I loved it. And in the quiet of the night, a lingering, heavy question always settles over me. What if my father had never made that promise? What if he had just taken the lottery ticket, told me the truth about my aunt or the bills, and never dangled the dream of a new car in front of me? If that seed of obsession had never been planted, if I had never been forced to look outward for an escape from my own home, where would I be right now? Would I have gone to college for computer science? Would I be sitting in a sleek office in Silicon Valley right now, working as a lead programmer? Could I have been the one developing the very video games my brother used to play? It is a strange, haunting kind of grief. It is the mourning of a life that never actually happened. I am proud of the man I became, but I will always wonder about the boy I was supposed to be. It makes you realize how incredibly fragile our destinies really are. A single, selfish lie from a father can completely destroy a programmer's future. It can wipe out a career before it even begins. But at the same time, a promise kept, and a machine made of steel, glass, and rubber, can completely turn a life around and save a brother from fading away into the dark. Every choice is a sacrifice. Every new road taken means another one is left behind forever. You never really know where the highway will lead until you are already miles down the pavement.